Chapter 2. The woman sat skewed in the chair opposite Adrian, knees together, arms pressed to her sides, shoulders forward, feet tucked in. A zigzag on the metal chair. The flesh was sparse on her bones. Around her waist, she wore a cloth of yellow and black faded geometric shapes. Her breasts were covered by a loose blouse. Adrian could not guess her age. The people here seemed ageless to him. She called him doctor. Crawford answered to his questions in a toneless voice, so low he strained to hear. Not once did she meet his eye, but studied her hands folded in her lap. She complained of headaches and asked for medicine for the pain. But the doctors had found nothing wrong with her, so they sent her to him. Adrian talked about what he could do for her, searched for words he thought she might understand. On the paper in front of him was written her name. He spoke it out loud. For the first time, she looked at him. She pointed at a bottle of vitamins on his desk, and so he gave it to her. It was an easy thing to do. The night Adrian Lockhart dreamt, one of the few times he had done so since arriving in the country, he was on the edge of a waterfall, leaning forward, hovering over the rush of water. Down below, he could see nothing beyond the torrent of water. In the dream, he was a child again. He stretched out his arms and swallow dived, walking just as he would have been engulfed by the falling water. The dream was not of death, because he walked softly, laughing. An echo of the feeling returns to him as he sits and gazes out of the window. His thoughts carried adrift on the tide of the voice of the old man lying in the bed. A child's face appeared over the top of the wall, a child's grinning face. The eyes met Adrian's own. A moment later, the face disappeared, then came the sound of laughter, and a memory of the dream rose up, the feeling of falling, a surge in his stomach, the glee that comes from an innocent physical pleasure. He turns to where the old man lies, his arms above the cotton sheet, pressed against the length of his body. The old man has stopped speaking and is watching him. His eyes, surrounded by curtains of ashy skin, are small, dark, and liquid bright. Adrian is silent a few seconds longer. He hopes his lapse will appear deliberate, a moment of contemplation. Shall I come by tomorrow? The old man inclines his head and continues to watch him. Adrian, who might be used to such things, feels discomfited. Reflexively, he continues. Is there anything you want? Books? Newspapers? I'll arrange it for you. Thank you, I have everything. The voice is hoarse, the words accompanied by a slight smile, a tightening of the facial muscles, a stretching of the lips. The impression more of pain than pleasure. Very well then. Midday, Adrian rises, gathers his briefcase and jacket, and steps into the shaded corridor, where the air is cooler by a degree or two. He leans against the wall. The building has no air conditioning, except in the ICU ward, and even there, it seems to battle unequally against the burning outside air, which seeps through every fissure in the brickwork. He breathes deeply, counts to 3, and walks down the corridor into the daylight. He crosses the quadrangle towards his office, sun beating squarely down upon the crown of his head. The quadrangle is no more than a patch of yellowed grass, divided into triangles by a pair of crossing paths. Each triangle is hemmed with concrete and contains a single concrete bench. Never has Adrian seen anybody sitting there. Whoever designed the place must have imagined the occupants of the building relaxing or eating their lunch here. But the sun makes it impossible. Behind the door of his office, he sets the briefcase squarely upon the desk, turns on the fan, removes his jacket and stands with his sweat-soaked back to the wind. He pours himself a glass of water from a plastic bottle, opens the briefcase, and removes his fountain pen and papers. When he was first shown to the room, his office, he recognized it for what it was, though neither he nor the woman hospital administrator made a comment. Towering walls that reached up to a square of unpainted ceiling, a metal door fitted with a bolt and padlock, a solitary narrow window with 6 steel bars that reached across the outside sill, an oversized desk covered in scarred orange-colored varnish and faced by 3 chairs of different heights and ages. On a brittle wire, a single 40-watt light bulb rotated and cast troubled shadows into the corners of the room. Adrian had knocked his head on it as he crossed the room and now was left with a burn, shiny and taut, on his forehead. Twice he had put through a request for the window to be enlarged. In his converted box room, he sits apart from the sounds outside. The creak of the gurney, the clatter of metal upon metal, names being called, footsteps, smart and fast, the shuffle and bump of a person on crutches, the piece of paper in front of him. He has already hidden with his patient's name. Next to the words, reason for referral, Adrian has written self. For several minutes, he writes down everything he has been told in the last 2 hours, as he remembers it. He writes swiftly, unhesitatingly. The smooth nib of the pen moves across the paper inaudibly, tracing in black lines the story of the man in the private room. A fly is trapped, one moment frenziedly hitting the window, the next hurtling across the room above Adrian's head. He swats at it and misses. Now his concentration is broken, and so he sets down his pen, crosses to the window and prizes it open. Beyond the high walls, he hears water running, the hollow knock of empty buckets, women's voices arguing, he thinks. He is not sure. He thinks how quiet affluence is. People living in private spaces, arguments in the shape of silence and closed doors. Compares it to the rowdy and self-consciousness of poverty. The swooping laughter of children, though, is the same anywhere in the world. That morning, after he woke from the dream, he pushed the sheets back and lay staring at the blank ceiling and listening to the noises of the morning. Perhaps because of the dream, he thought of his father and his mother. Of his father, sitting opposite him in the parlor, outside the trees gradually turning black against a silver sky, each possessed of its own lucent aura. Adrian watching his father's hands, the black hairs against the pale skin, the bony wrists, gray-veined, emerging from the cuff of his checked weekend shirt. His father's fingers fumbling with pieces of an air-fix plane. For years, Adrian assumed the idea for the afternoon's project must have belonged to one of his parents, most likely his mother. For Adrian had no interest in model aircraft, could never see the point in gluing together pieces of molded plastic. But now, when he turns the notion around, he considers the possibility the idea may have been his. The trip to the shop to choose the aircraft, the drive home clutching the paper-wrapped box, spreading the pieces out upon the polished rosewood table, all hint at a child's lack of imagination and eagerness to please. His mother seated at her desk, answering correspondence, watching them both through averted eyes. The model, though, is a Lancaster bill. Adrian's own choice would have been more predictable, a Spitfire, say. His father tells him this planes-braided German damned 2 years before the end of the war. Adrian watches his father fumble, knowing he must not help. There are occasions when an intervention might be disguised as filial duty, clearing his father's breakfast plates, fastening a tricky cufflink, but times when his father was bent over his shoelaces, Adrian saw no choice but to watch the knot slip over and over through his fingers. Sometimes Adrian's mother went to help. Adrian noticed how, as soon as she was there, his father levered himself up from the chair in stiff silence and left the room. And so he sits silently, watching his father's hands, while his father in turn appears to have forgotten the presence of his son, fights to hold on to the pieces in fingers that tremble and flutter like a mother's wings. Another memory superimposes itself on the first, of walking through woods with his father, searching for ley lines, or was it underground streams, each holding onto a forked stick. His delight when the stick in his father's hands began to tremble. Since the first days of his arrival in the new country, without the order of his previous life, time had taken on a kind of shapelessness. In the early days, he had risen full of interest in his new surroundings. Every action, however small, held its own pleasure in the day, showering beneath the thin trickle of water that barely wet his shoulders, the sound of his own footsteps echoing in the corridors, the time he spent rearranging the shabby furnishings of his office. Each activity had its own purpose, pitch and resonance, like the notes from a turning fork. But as the days passed, the resonance had faded. Breakfast in the canteen, and he watched his colleagues come and go, each with a nod of the head. He knew their names, faces, their occupations. Some he had shared a beer with after work in a nearby bar, invariably marked by a late arrival or a drink left unfinished as someone hurried back to deal with another emergency. At meal times, he sat over a cup of instant coffee, watching the tendrils of stream grow thin and fade. As around him, others went about their business. At other times, he walked the long ones, saw the occupants of a crowded minibus driven by a young man high on marijuana at the end of a 16-hour shift, encountered the unseen gaze of a man beneath whom bamboo scaffolding had collapsed, watched listless mothers fanning inert babies. 3 weeks following his arrival, Adrian saw his first patients. This after he had obtained the consent of the hospital administrator for a system of referrals. The people his colleagues sent to him were outpatients mostly, the ones with whom the doctor could find nothing wrong. They sat with rounded shoulders and lowered eyes, hands curled in their laps like docile pets. "What brings you here?" the doctor sent me to you, urged on by Adrian's gentle encouragement. They described headaches, pains in their arms, legs, abdomens, here, touching body parts. When did the pains begin? Some time after the trouble. Yes, I was healthy before then. At Adrian's insistence, they described in dampened voices what they had endured, as though the events described belonged to somebody else. Adrian had read the press accounts, the post-conflict reports. He knew how the war had begun. The barely remarked border crossing of a small contingent of foreign trained rebel soldiers, who soon declared their presence by taking over a series of towns and vowed to march on the capital and overrun the bloated autocracy, which had ruled for 20 years. And he knew how it ended, how the civilians had borne the brunt of the rebels' fury from the outset and endured their agonies for a decade until the war was brought to a halt by the army of a nearby state with an ambitious despot of its own. Adrian's empathy sounded slight and convincing in his own ears, so he nudged his patients along with questions, aware of the energy it cost him to obtain a sliver of trust. Later, in his apartment, he splashed water on his face. Once he filled the basin and plunged his face into the water, held his breath until his lungs ached. Alone, he waited for his thoughts to be restored, for his jarred soul to settle. And afterwards, each of his new patients made the same request for medicine, to which Adrian explained he was not that sort of doctor. A nod of acceptance rather than understanding. They thanked him and left. None of them ever returned. Late afternoon on a Saturday, Adrian was walking past a row of stalls on the streets behind the hospital. A woman called out to him. He turned, recognizing her by the yellow and black print of her wrap. Automatically, Adrian smiled and raised his hand to wave. The woman was walking towards him with an unsteady, perfect gait. A damp stain ran down the front of her blouse, the top few buttons of which were undone, partially revealing an arc of dark nipples. "Doctor," she called, grasping him by the arm. Her breath was hot. He couldn't understand what she was saying, wished he could remember her name. She lost her grip on his arm momentarily, stumbled and fell against him. A passerby, a man in his 50s, intervened on Adrian's behalf and grabbed the woman by the arm. This woman shrieked, and in trying to pull herself free, fell backwards, landing heavily on the ground before scuttling away through the legs of the onlookers. The man brushed at Adrian's arm as if to remove the woman's touch. Sorry, that woman is a crazy woman, no family," and touched his finger lightly to his temple, a butterfly taking to the wing. Adrian shook his head, flustered, disappointed at the failure of his own response. But when he looked about for the woman, she had gone. He thinks about her sometimes, thinks of her now, at the open window. For days he had waited for her, but she never came. It is nearly 1 o'clock lunchtime. These days he is acutely aware of the hours of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Meals have become more than punctuation marks in his day. They have become events in themselves. When he was a young man, during his training in the hospital, there were times when he would forget to eat. While he was preparing for his doctorate, he would leave his books to run across the road and buy a slice of pizza from the takeaway opposite. Unwilling even to wait the minutes it took the Greek owner to warm it, he would eat it as he made his way back to his study, cold congealed cheese and curled ham. He closes the window, trapping the sounds of the other side of the glass. There is dust from the seal on his palms, a fine red ubiquitous dust that covers everything. At this time of year, it hangs in the air, a red mist obscuring the hills behind the city. hovering above the horizon. Adrian feels the dust in the back of his throat every time he breathes. His skin and nose itch. The wind sucks the moisture out of his pores. He finds a handkerchief in his pocket. He has taken to carrying one again, dappens it with bottled water and rubs at his palms. And though rust-colored stains rise on the white cloth, he feels as if all he is doing is working the dust into the layers of skin. There are days he feels constantly soiled, can feel the dust trapped beneath his shirt, clinging to his damp skin. The canteen is still empty, save for two men in porters' uniforms, hunched over, scattered lotto tickets and a newspaper. The woman behind the counter heaps rice upon his plate and then, turning to the two turens behind her, lifts the lid of the nearest and spoons chicken and sauce on top of the rice. A fortnight or so before, Adrian had noticed how the woman served the local staff in the queue from the other tureen. He had asked the woman behind the counter what was inside the other pot. Chicken, the unhelpfulness had provoked his insistence. "I'll have some of that, please." The woman had duly served him with what appeared to be identical chicken stew. At the table, Adrian ate a spoonful. The food was fiery with pepper. Glad to be alone, he reached for a glass of water and another, returned to his office without finishing his meal, his mouth and lips still smarting. Since then, the woman behind the counter nods at him and sometimes smiles. She appears to gain no particular satisfaction from what occurred. Rather, it seems to give their daily encounters a modest intimacy. Adrian remembers that day for the chicken stew and also because it was the day the new patient sent for him. That the new patient was a man of some standing was evidenced by the fact he had a private room. Adrian passed the room every day on his way to his office. Never had he seen any visitors, save a retainer carrying sometimes a cloth-covered basket, sometimes a knotted sheet of soiled bed linen, sometimes a pile of laundered clothes. Another time, Adrian had glimpsed through the slit of the partially open door, the retainer sitting on the bed, fanning the tepid air with a ruffian fan, chasing flies and adjusting the bed sheets with a twitch of the fingers, just like the mothers on the children's ward. The day Adrian returned to his office, his lips smarting, he had found the retainer squatting on his haunches outside his office door. "Can I help you?" Adrian unlocked the heavy door and the man rose and followed him into the room. Once inside, he handed Adrian a folded slip of paper. Adrian opened the paper. It contained no more than a few lines, faint pencil strokes that meandered slowly across the page, and spoke of an elderly hand. "Dear sir, I wish to request some time alone with you. I would be grateful if you gave Baba Gale, the bearer of this note, a date and hour convenient to yourself. I have no particular restriction on my own time, though it is, by nature of my condition, somewhat limited. Yours faithfully, Elias Paul Esquire." Out of the night, a scream. Adrian wakes, sweating and disoriented. The fan is still. The air in the room is hot. He lies and listens. The whir of crickets is a track somewhere in the distance, the call of a night bird. The window above his bed is open, and the air carries the scent of wood smoke, fragrant like burning cedar. Adrian wonders if perhaps the scream belonged in his sleep, but then hears it again, plainly, a woman's cry. He reaches under the mosquito net and switches on the lamp at his bedside. Lets his eyes adjust to the light. From the chair, takes a t-shirt, slips it over his head, and opens the door onto to the courtyard. His bungalow apartment faces. A commotion is unfolding by the hospital gates. Out of the darkness, a gurney pushed by two orderly bearing a great bulbous shape appears beneath the greenish glow of the security light. A nurse holds up a drip. The trolley hurtles in the direction of the operating theater. Adrian moves forward a few paces, peering through the dim light. As the group moves closer, he sees the form on top of the trolley is, in fact, two people. A man crouching astride an inert form. The man is pushing down with the heels of his hands, using his entire weight, also it seems, to press down upon the patient's abdomen. The patient is a woman, hugely pregnant. Someone shouts an order to stop as Adrian watches the doctor continues to bear down upon the woman. At the same time, exhorting her to push, it seems unthinkable to Adrian that a woman in her condition could possibly tolerate such treatment. His eyes are drawn to the child's head, just visible, half in, half out of this world. The one birth Adrian witnessed took place inside a room overlooking the Thames and the House of Parliament. Nothing prepared him for the terror, which he tried vainly to conceal. He says, or thought he sensed, his wife's forgiveness reaching from inside her cavern of pain. Later, a retrospective guilt grew inside him, like the guilt of a soldier caught running away from enemy fire. Nevertheless, with or without his courage, it had happened. One moment the two of them were on one side of something huge, the next tumbling down the other side, his daughter was born. In the half-lit corridor, on a narrow trolley and in the dead of night, another child is being born before Adrian's eyes. The doctor on top of the woman gives a final mighty push. At the same time, the woman utters a long, low groan. A gush of liquid. The child slips out. Adrian watches, waits for someone to step forward and pick the infant up, slap his bottom, or blow into his ears. There is a terrible stillness about the child, lying there between his mother's legs. Adrian, who knows so little of such matters, knows this much. The life being saved belongs to the woman. Inside the apartment, he leans against the doorframe and lets the breath out of his body. Listens to the sound of the trolley, slower now, fade away. He pulls off his t-shirt and crawls back underneath the mosquito net. For a while, he lies on his back, eyes closed. Behind his lids, he sees the scene, the baby's head, the eyes closed and peaceful, as though he had taken a look at the world he was about to enter and changed his mind. Sleepless now, he turns on the light for a second time and climbs out of bed. In the kitchen, he pours himself a glass of water from the bottle in the fridge. Tiny red ants mass around a half biscuit on a plate, the edges of a patch of spilled guava juice like beasts around a vanishing water hole. He picks up the plate. The ants swarm over his fingers, delivering fiery bites. He swings around, drops the plate into the sink, and holds his hand under the tap, watches the flailing ants sucked into the vortex. In the sitting room, he sits up, the crumbling foam cushions of the couch, and picks up a book from the shelf beneath the office table. It is an English novel of the kind taught in schools and left by the previous occupant. Adrian opens it randomly and begins to read, has difficulty concentrating, becomes entangled by words and their meaning, then before he can reach the end of the paragraph, the lights fade. For a moment he sits, insufficiently bothered to move, lets himself give in to the inertia and finds it comforting. A minute passes, then another. The thought occurs to him to sleep on the seat, when a series of rapid knocks on the door jerks him into alertness. The man on the doorstep is dressed in green hospital scrubs, a t-shirt pulled over the top. On his feet, a pair of rubber flip-flops. His face is lost in the darkness. "Hey," he says. "Hello. Sorry to bother you. Thought I might crash here a few hours. Hope you don't mind." A pause. The man points beyond Adrian's head to the interior of the room. The light was on. Adrian blinks and, not knowing what else to do, moves aside. "Thanks," says the man as he steps over the threshold into the apartment. His movements are exact, assured, unlike Adrian, who fumbles to find a candle and matches. Light the candle's wick and set it on the table. In the trembling yellow light, he sees something familiar in the man's profile. "You are attending the woman just now," the visitor notes. "What happened?" "What happened?" The man looks up at Adrian. "The baby was stuck. The woman was in labor for 2 days. And now," he shrugs, "well, now it's out." Adrian is silent at that. The man scratches his ear, but ventures nothing further. Then, "So you live here?" "That's right." "Yeah, I think I heard that. We used to use this place, in between times after a late call. Mind if I crash? I'll fetch some linen. Don't trouble yourself." Adrian goes into the bedroom anyhow, where he locates a pair of sheets and takes a pillow from his own bed. When he returns, the man is sitting barefoot now, thumbing through the volume Adrian has left open on the table, squinting at the print in the inconstant light and pinching the place between his eyebrows. At the sound of Adrian's tread, he replaces the book carefully, face down as he had found it. For some reason, Adrian wants to tell him it doesn't matter. The book doesn't belong to him, but he says nothing. As he bends to put the sheets and pillows down, the man looks up and extends his hand. "Kai Mansare," in an exhausted voice. "Adrian Lockhart. Pleased to meet you." He places the pillow against the wooden arm of the seat, punches a hole in it to create a hollow, and lies down. With no more apparently forthcoming, Adrian carries the candle through to his bedroom, the shadows rearing up and shrinking back around him, and climbs into bed. In this country, there's no dawn, no spring or autumn. Nature is an abstract timekeeper. About daybreak, there is nothing in the least ambiguous. It is dark or it is light, with barely a sliver in between. Adrian wakes to the light. The air is heavy and carries the faint odor of mold. Like a cricket pavilion entered for the first time in the season, it is always there, stronger in the morning and on some days more than others. It pervades everything: the bed sheets, towels, his clothes, dust and mold. Outside his window, somebody is talking in a loud voice. He has no idea what they are saying. For a moment, his mind drifts with the thought, to be surrounded by languages you don't understand, of how it must, in some ways, be like being deaf. The deaf children he knew, whose parents sometimes came to see him, became remote, cut off, even inside their own families. Silent islands. By the time they were diagnosed, the damage to the relationship with their parents and siblings was already done. No wonder, he thinks, that the deaf create their own communities, deliberately turning their backs on the hearing world. In the kitchen, Kai Mansare, barefoot but dressed in the clothes of the night before, is opening and closing cupboard doors. He doesn't turn when Adrian greets him. "Hey man, not much here. Tell me you have coffee." Adrian opens a cupboard on the opposite wall and finds the tin of instant coffee. He fills the kettle with water from the plastic bottle and lights the gas ring. Kai Mansoret watches him. Boiling sterilizes it. Yes, I know, says Adrian, feeling the other's gaze. He fetches down the only 2 mugs he possesses and prises the lid of the coffee tin open with the end of a teaspoon. How did you find the couch? I hope it was all right. Yeah, fine. Me and your couch go back a long time. I'm not a big sleeper anyhow. I had to check on my patient. How is she doing? When there is no reply, Adrian glances up. Kai Mansoret is studying the label on the coffee tin. Adrian can't be sure whether he has heard the question or not. Suddenly, the other man looks up at him. I could eat, he announces. I'll make us breakfast. There's nothing much here. You don't say. For the first time since they met, Kai Mansoret smiles. You relax. He steps around Adrian so nimbly, Adrian doesn't have time to move out of the way. Opens the door of the apartment. I say come. He beckons. A hospital porter hurries over. Kai hands him a few coins, and a short time later, the porter reappears carrying a plastic bag and 2 freshly baked loaves of bread, wrapped in newspaper. Kai passes him a coin in return, and the porter nods gratefully and retreats. On the kitchen counter, Kai sets down the loaves of bread and unpacks the bag. A tin of powdered milk, another of Kraft cheese, onions, a dozen eggs, a fruit, large oval and green with a rich skin, a single line. Adrian dresses to the sounds of his visitor, preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Efficient sounds that relay a deftness of hand, a certainty of procedure. Still, he dresses quickly. By the time Adrian reappears, the apartment has been overtaken by the smell of frying onion. In the kitchen, Kai Mansoret breaks eggs with one hand into a soup bowl and whisks them into a froth. He has made coffee in the teapot and replaced the broken lid with a saucer. Adrian pours 2 cups and sets one where the visitor can reach it, then leans back on the counter. In the silence, a prickle of self-consciousness touches him. He shifts from one foot to the other, watching the newcomer move around the kitchen. His kitchen, as though he were a man entirely alone in his own space. It is Adrian who feels like the intruder. He has yet to become used to it. The silences between people. In Britain, people came or were sent to see him. He learned to examine their silence, to see if it was tinted with shame or pain or guilt, colored with reluctance or tainted with anger. He himself used silence as a lure, pitting his own silence against theirs until they were compelled to fill the void. Here, those tricks have no place, even with those whom he calls his patients. If Adrian falls silent, so too do they, waiting patiently and without embarrassment. Here, the silences have a different quality, are entirely devoid of expectation, and so he watches Kai Mansoret shaving curls of cheese with a knife blade, swift, deft movements. Next, Kai spoons 2 teaspoons of powdered milk into a teacup, dabbles a little water from the tap into it, and mixes the powder and water into a paste. This he adds to the eggs along with the cheese, relights the gas ring beneath the frying pan, and pours the mixture into it. While the eggs cook, he divides the fruit, scooping out shiny gray-black seeds, cuts a lime in half, and squeezes the juice over the orange flesh. They sit down at the table to eat. Papaya, says Adrian, recognizing the fruit. He has never seen one so large. Popo, replies the other. Popo, is that what you call papaya? Kai Mansoret turns and looks at him briefly. That's what it is. He takes a bite. Netherlands? I beg your pardon? Kai Mansaray eats rapidly, hunched over the table, arms either side of his plate, as though ready to defend his food. Where you are from? He tears a hunk of bread from the log and points it at Adrian's chest. I am English, Adrian frowns. Obviously, surely, okay. Only we get a lot of Dutch. Medical or emergency? You are not in surgical? Actually, neither. Adrian takes a sip of his coffee. I'm a psychologist. The other man looks up from his food at that, raises his eyebrows momentarily, inclines his head by slowly tilting his chin to one side. Okay. The word is spoken in two parts, split down the center as neatly as if he'd used an axe, as though he is considering the statement carefully, examining its likelihood. Adrian might just have confessed to being the grand old Duke of York. So, do they make you pay for this place? He says, changing the subject. Adrian tells him, and Kai snorts by way of response. For how long? I mean, I take it you haven't immigrated. I'm seconded for a year. So you don't plan on coming to live here for good? No, well, I thought not. If you did, you'd be the first immigrant in 200 years. Kai Mansaray laughs at his own joke. A raucous, ear-splitting sound. We don't even have any tourists, except your salt, that is. My salt? The visitor takes another bite of bread. Nothing. What I meant to say to you was, welcome. He raises his coffee cup. Thank you, says Adrian, and sips at the cold remnants of his cup. Silence for the rest of the meal, more or less. When they are through eating, Adrian picks up the plate and moves towards the dustbin. Hold it, the other man reaches out, removes the plates from Adrian's hand and scrapes the remainders of their meal into the discarded plastic bag. For a moment, he holds it over the dustbin in his outstretched hand, then bends over and peers into the hollow of the bin and grunts, ants. He scoops up the bin and ties the plastic bag and appends the entire content into the bag. Juice bottle, biscuit pieces, ants and all, ties the handles of the bag and drops it into the bin. At the sink, Adrian watches him wash his hands with meticulous care, examining the cuticles and searching under the fingernails for grains of dirt. From the doorway, he raises his hand in a salute. So, next time, he slides his feet into his flip-flops. Yes, nods Adrian, next time, and watches the door close.